Good morning, guys. Welcome back. Today, I want to talk about being right. The more I think about everything going on in the world right now and everything I grew up with and every problem in a relationship and pretty much everything, it always seems to come back down to I'm right, you're wrong. And if both sides believe they're right and the other one is wrong, there is no way to reach a resolution or a compromise of any kind. So let's start with my background. My parents were fairly radical, actually. We didn't necessarily believe a lot of the things that our mission organization taught. My dad was actually in trouble a lot for his radical ideas. And yet, there was still a lot of things that we absolutely believed, and we knew we were right. And we had proof. But everybody seems to have proof, but the proof only works for them. So, for instance, we knew that we were the only real Christians because we followed the Bible to the letter. And that, for instance, Catholics couldn't possibly be Christians because they didn't believe that Christ had died and rose again on the third day and that was how you were saved. They believed that you still had to do mass and all of these works, right? Works were bad things, but they were also good things, but also they were bad things. You're supposed to be saved just by grace, just by faith. Doing good things was supposed to be how you showed that you were a born-again person, that you were living in the Spirit, that you were abiding in faith. But they weren't supposed to be what got you into heaven. But it was always confusing to me because we constantly preached that doing good things and being kind and loving and all of these things was supposed to be evidence of something that had already happened. And that it wasn't supposed to be what we tried to do to make God happy with us. But also we were highly encouraged to do those things. So it was like, here's a list of things that you don't need to do, but also you need to do them. It's very confusing. If you look at relationships are always about compromise. I don't think you need to compromise yourself. If you come to the point where you're compromising your very being and who you are and what matters to you, that's dangerous. But communication and compromise, I would say, are probably the two biggest things that have worked for me. Sometimes communication is not fun, but if you're truly communicating and giving and taking information, you're listening and you're speaking your truths, but you're hearing the other person as well. You have to have a common goal, a vested interest in a common goal. If your goal is that you're right and that everything happened that way, you can't reach a common goal unless that person bends. I've always been the one in a relationship who bends. And finally, I've gotten to a point personally where I recognize that at some point it's unhealthy for me to bend. But that's hard for me to see that line because I spent so many years being essentially taught, never actually necessarily told, but it was insinuated essentially that it was my job to just submit, to bend, always. Always, always. I could have opinions, but at the end of the day, it was my job to submit. And I'm very good at that. Too good. To my own detriment. And in many cases, if you are a good person, if you are a loving and honorable and respectful partner, if you always submit, and that's the rule, that's actually not good for the other person either. We're both very strong personalities, and we both have to know when to bend and when to stand our ground. For me, it's mostly I have to remember when to stand my ground, say, no, this is important. And we don't have to do it my way, but it needs to be something that we've defined clearly the boundaries, because this is important. And if we have this conversation and you don't remember it tomorrow, that's a problem. Because I spend so much time and effort talking about this. If you don't remember it, I know we're getting older. Apparently our memories go too sometimes, and that's okay. Relationships, religion, the world at large. We're right, you're wrong. In the United States, political parties, we're right, they're wrong. And when you have become so solidly dedicated to being right instead of being kind, I feel like people have decided to be right to their own detriment. How do you think cults happen? People are convinced that this is the right way. And so they will sacrifice everything. They'll even sacrifice the well-being of children. They'll sacrifice their own well-being. They'll sacrifice their partner's well-being. They will. In some cases, there have been cases where they sacrificed all of their lives for a belief. So how do we know when something is right? How do you know? That's been my question for many years. How do I know it's right? And I think I finally come to a place where I've said, I don't need to know if it's right or wrong, black or white. Is it good and healthy for me? And is it good and healthy for the people around me? Because a lot of us don't know what good and healthy is. Let's put it in a different perspective. Does it hurt the people around me? The people that matter most, or even the people who are just around me, my neighbors, the store employees down the street, my coworkers. Does it hurt people? Does it encroach upon their rights to freedom of speech and liberty and happiness, the pursuit of happiness at least? Do my actions threaten their livelihood? Am I hurting other people? I think we've lost the plot. And more it seems to be, is it what I want? And I'm one who has come from a place of not knowing what I wanted and never doing what I wanted. And I've had to come that way. I've had to say, okay, I want this, and it's okay to want that. But I don't also just stand here and say, I want this and I'm not leaving until I get it. Ultimatums rarely, if ever, work. At least there's generally not a healthy outcome for anyone. I see people screaming and yelling in this country, in stores, on the street, protesting. I think it's important to be able to protest. I think you also need to pick your battles. Personally, I don't like masks. I wasn't convinced they did anything, but I wore them. I wasn't convinced about the vaccine, and I've taken my time on it. But I wore the masks. I social distance. I followed my local ordinances because it wasn't a hill I was willing to die on. And I understand how you can say, well, if we let them do this, then the next thing we know, we'll all be living in little 4x4 cubic feet cement cells, and it's the beginning of the end. I can see how you can get there. I once ascribed to the worst case scenario immediately follows the slightest breach of our freedoms mindset. I used to be there, but it doesn't really help you live in the now. If you've ever seen the movie Babe, Pig in the City, there's a point where the one of the apes, I think it was the anyway, he says he's talking about living in the actual nowness, and that's always stuck with me. Gotta live in the nowness. It's important to plan for the future. It's definitely important to remember the past. But it's more important to live in the nowness. Because otherwise, what do we have? When you don't live in the present and you don't live in reality, you're living in a false reality. How do you know it's false? Oh my gosh, we could spend forever figuring out how do you know what? How do you know this? I just wanted to say that I think we need to stop trying to be right. Because it seems like the more it's important to someone that they be right, it's more important that they prove that everyone else is wrong. I think I'm right about some things, but I don't go out there preaching and setting up soapboxes and screaming at the world. I think there is a place for protest and there is a place for change. But I think we need to consider what we're protesting and how it affects those around us. Are we dealing with covert segregation? Yeah, that needs to be protested. That needs to be dealt with. Do we have to wear a piece of cloth on our face? Is there an unprecedented amount of police violence and just violence in general by entitled people, assuming that they're right, knowing they're right, and taking justice into their own hands? Yes. Does that need to be protested? I think so. Do we need to change it? Absolutely. Is it a bigger deal because people's lives are being lost and their freedoms and rights are being encroached upon than having to wear a piece of cloth on your face? I think there are bigger problems. And I know that it's all subjective, but I think we have bigger problems. I don't think you should have to get a vaccine if you don't want it. It's your body. Go ahead. Protest it. Advocate for change. The ends don't justify the means. If you're upset about voter fraud that may or may not have occurred and has never been proven, you can't just redraw districts and do whatever you please in the name of the end result being secure elections that you think are secure. Just because you think they're secure doesn't mean that the other side does. But I'm right and you're wrong. Oh, okay. Because it serves my interests. Therefore, this is the right way to do it. We have to be able to have a conversation. The world is turning into Karens. At least this country really feels like it. Somebody said the other day, I think it was Leon Lush. I was watching some of his videos. He cracks me up. He was like, is it just me? Is it just the United States? Like, are Karens on the rise? Like, is this whole country? Like, is it just us? Is it just us? Because it seems like it's everywhere in this country. I agree. Feels like it's everywhere. Feels like we have entitled people screaming about their rights when they don't have to worry that they're going to get pulled over and thrown in jail for a trumped up charge. I didn't mean to do that, but I did. A lot of us live in privilege, whether we know it or not. Do you have bombs raining down on your head? Is your home destroyed? Keep the perspective, folks. Is it better to be right, or is it better to be alive? Is it better to be right, or is it better to be there for your kids? We spend too much time trying to be right and proving that we're right. And that's the problem. We spend too much time trying to prove to everyone else that we're right. But most people that are absolutely obsessed with proving their rightness to the world can't provide any proof that's convincing to the other side. my background, we would produce the Bible as proof. But a lot of times we were trying to convince people who didn't believe that the Bible was a legitimate book. This is the proof. I don't believe that's a thing. But it is. And it's proof. Okay. Yeah. Maybe stop trying to prove to the world and just be happy that you know it yourself. And if you believe that, believe it. And as long as nobody's waterboarding you to convince you that it's not true, even though you strongly believe that it is, be content in that and affect change in ways that work. Because I'm sorry, but it's rare that getting on a soapbox and screaming at the world has been effective. You have to do something. And that does not mean taking justice, your form of justice, into your own hands. Anyway, I know I pause a lot in my videos. Hopefully that doesn't bore the pants off of people. It's just me thinking. And maybe it's okay that my videos are 20 minutes long, so I don't really have time to edit them. Stay mindful, folks. I'll see you next time. Bye.
I know as close as I am.